Hello everyone, P41 here. So today I'm going to talk about what to look for when buying a used generator. So this will be our subject for today. It's a Titan Industrial 8500 watt generator. It's got a 13 horsepower engine with electric start and a brushless alternator. Pretty basic generator design. Now the first thing you're going to want to look for is the overall condition of the generator. Is it in good condition, bad condition, okay condition? Does it look like it's brand new out of the box? Does it look like it fell off the back of a truck? Stuff like that. You want to look for signs that it's been exposed to the elements. Heavily faded paint is a sign that it's been exposed to the sun a lot. Does it have any rust or corrosion? Heavy rust and heavy corrosion is a sign that it's been exposed to moisture, and obviously moisture and electricity don't mix. And if you have heavy corrosion or rust on the outside of the generator, there's a chance you could have some on inside the generator head or inside the electronics, and that can cause a lot of problems down the line. You want to look for anything that's missing or broken. Notice we have our battery over here, and it's just kind of flopping around because the battery hold down is missing. Anything that's missing or broken, you'll either have to fix or replace or just learn to live with. I've seen some generators that are missing the air filter cover. That's not good. Usually when they're missing the air filter cover, they're also missing the air filter, and the engine has been running without an air filter, which means it's been breathing in dirty air, and that is very bad for the engine. If you look up here, you'll notice that our fuel gauge is broken. The plastic, the clear plastic that provides the window to see through has actually degraded, and now this is open. This can let moisture into the gas tank. So just look for anything that has been broken or that's missing. Another thing to look for is modifications. Has anybody modified anything? Have they been messing with anything? Look for hacked up wiring. A lot of times you'll see hacked wiring on a generator, and that can cause problems. Just generally look over the generator, get an idea of what kind of lifestyle it's lived and how it's been cared for. So the next thing you want to check is the oil. Oil is the lifeblood of your engine, and it will tell you a lot about it and how it's been maintained. So this one has a dipstick, and a lot of these engines, you check them without screwing the dipstick all the way in. So when you check your oil, you want it to be a nice golden brown color. Ideally it will be at the full mark, but as long as it's in the crosshatch or at least not insanely low, it should be fine. If it's a little bit darker, that's not really a big deal. If it's really, really dark, that's not good, but it's not necessarily a death sentence, so long as everything else checks out. Now you want to check it for any kind of contamination, mainly metal. Are there any chunks in it? Does it look glittery or sparkly when you hold it up to the light? If the answers to any of these questions are yes, put it back in the engine, walk away. That engine has severe problems. If all of that checks out, smell it. You want to smell the oil. I know that sounds weird, but you want to smell it and see if it smells like fuel. If it smells like fuel, and especially if it's also over full, then what's happening is you've got a leaky needle or seat in your carburetor, and when the generator sits, fuel is leaking into the engine and making its way into the crankcase and getting into the oil. Now, this isn't too big of a deal as long as it's caught early and repaired and you change the oil out, but if the engine continues to run like this with fuel in the oil, it will eventually severely damage the engine because gasoline simply does not provide the lubrication necessary for an engine. Check your air filter. A lot of generators these days are running foam air filters, and this one is no exception. Now this actually has 2 layers of foam for its filter, one coarse and one fine. Now these filters have to be oiled in order for them to function properly, and a lot of people simply don't do that. If you don't oil these filters, what will happen is the media will dry out, it will disintegrate, and then the remains will go into the engine. Now usually the engine will survive ingesting the remains of the filter just fine. The problem is that after that, if they dried out and disintegrated, often the owner hasn't been checking it and they have no idea, and they'll just keep running the generator and it'll be sucking in unfiltered air. So if your filter looks questionable at all, or even if it's in good condition, look behind it. Look for excessive dirt and dust buildup. If you've got a lot of dirt buildup behind the filter going into the carburetor, you're probably going to want to pass on that engine. There's a good chance it's badly worn out. But if it's clean, then you're probably okay. I recently had 2 Subaru generators come in. Both were running fine, but these filters had disintegrated and the media had gone through the engine. Luckily, they hadn't been running that way for too long, and the engine had ingested a ton of dirt, so I was able to just clean it up, put a new filter in, and they were fine. Take a look inside the gas tank. A lot of them will have one of these little screens in the inlet for when you pour the fuel in to filter it out a little bit. Just pull that out and take a look inside the tank. I don't know if this is going to show up, but what you're looking for is any debris in the fuel tank. A significant amount of debris could cause problems. If it's a metal fuel tank, you want to look for rust and corrosion down there. If you see little droplets that look like they're floating around at the bottom of the tank in the fuel, that's a sign that you've got water in the fuel, and that will cause a lot of problems down the road. And that's especially common if you've got an issue like this where your fuel gauge has broken. It lets water in very easily, so you want to look for that. You want your fuel to be nice and clean. If your generator has electric start, take a look at the battery, see if you can find a manufacturing date. On this battery, it's right over here. I just put this battery in. It was manufactured 7/19. If your battery is more than a few years old, you're probably going to be looking at putting in a new battery very soon. So now I'm going to start the engine up, turn the fuel on, choke on, and because this has electric start, I'm going to go ahead and use the electric start and try that as well. Now ideally you want the engine to be cold when you do this because cold starts will often reveal if there's issues with an engine. It should start up fairly easily even if it hasn't run that recently. Turn the choke off. So as I mentioned, the engine should start fairly easily. If it's been sitting for a little while, it might take a few more pulls to get it going. But if you're really having to yank on that pull cord hard, or it's taking you 15-20 pulls to get it going, then that could be a sign of problems. Usually it'll be carburetor related, but it can also be caused by engine issues. A little bit of smoke out the exhaust at startup is nothing to be concerned about, especially black smoke. Black smoke at startup is typically just a byproduct of the choke functioning. What you don't want to see, however, is like a large billowing cloud of bluish white smoke. This is a sign that the engine is burning off oil for some reason. Let the engine warm up and listen to the way it runs. It should run nice and smooth without any popping or sputtering or surging. If you don't know what surging is, it's when the engine can't maintain a set RPM. It revs up and down over and over again in a cycle. Listen for any knocking or grinding or any abnormal noises from the engine or the generator head. If you hear a knocking or a grinding noise, then honestly your best bet is probably to just walk away from it. These are typically signs of a major internal problem. If you're hearing a rattling noise from the front of the engine, try applying a little bit of pressure to the recoil with your hand. If it goes away, you've either got a loose recoil or a loose blower housing, neither of which is a big deal. This is extremely common on certain models of Briggs & Stratton engines. A tapping noise from your valve cover area is typically a sign that your valves need to be adjusted. Moving on to the electrical side. Most people use just a small light or a device to make sure that the generator puts out power. Now this is fine for just making sure that the outlets work, but it doesn't really draw much of a load for testing purposes. Now if you've watched my other videos, you might know that I'm a big fan of using these large blowers to put a load on generators for testing. Of course, most people probably don't have these. Power tools create a decent amount of load in a small package. However, they aren't usually very well suited to creating a load for any extended period of time. Something that works really well for this is actually hair dryers. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but most hair dryers on high heat will pull at least 1800 watts of power. They're compact, they don't mind being left on for a while, and most people either own one or they have access to one. I don't own one or have access to one, but what I do have is this heat gun, which is essentially a hair dryer that wants to set your hair on fire. Regardless of your choice of load creating device, make sure you test all the outlets you possibly can on the generator. Now most generators will use the same standard household outlet style that you would find in a house. Now if one of them is not working but the rest do, it may be a simple case of just replacing the receptacle, which is not really that big of a deal. But if you have two or more out, you could be looking at some more significant wiring issues. Once you've verified that all the outlets are working, go ahead and plug your load into one of them and just let the generator run for a minute. Now just like we did before, we're going to listen to how the generator runs. It's going to sound a little bit different because it's under load now, but it should still run smoothly without any popping, sputtering, backfiring, or surging. You also want to listen to the engine and generator head for any of those abnormal noises I talked about earlier, any knocking, grinding, or any other scary noises coming from there. You're also going to want to watch the exhaust for any smoke, specifically a bluish-white smoke. Bluish-white smoke from the exhaust is a sign that the engine is burning oil. I've had a number of generators that seemed perfectly fine when there was no load on them, but as soon as you put a heavy load on them, the engine would start knocking, tapping, making all sorts of horrible noises, or sometimes you would get a light bluish-white haze of smoke coming out of the exhaust, or in a number of instances, both. My honest recommendation if you've got either of these symptoms is just go ahead and pass on that generator. If you have the time and patience, it's not a bad idea to run the generator for a few minutes with the load plugged into each of the outlets. Sometimes electrical problems will pop up only after they've had a load on them for a little while. So hopefully this helped you out. Subscribe if you'd like to see more, and if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them down below.